The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogman Taylor. In this episode, I talked with Mads Torgersen about the C# language, its evolution, some of his favorite language features, and the collaborative nature required for developing a modern programming language completely in the open. Along the way, we talk about the many ways that you can get involved in the evolution of C# and how you can suggest features or keywords, and even how you can enable the latest preview bits of the language and try them out in your projects today. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So, thank you very much, Mads, for agreeing to be on the show. My goodness, it's wonderful to be connected to you. And I have to say, I'm a big fan of C# and I've been using it for 14, 15 years now. And it's just, wow. It's essentially my entire career. It's wonderful.
I'm so glad to hear it.
Oh my goodness. So I was wondering, now obviously everyone's going to have seen the title of the episode. They're going, Mads, oh my goodness, I need to listen to this. But I wonder, could you give people a really brief sort of couple of sentences about you, just so that then if there's someone who's maybe new to .NET and they don't know, oh, who's this Mads fella, you know?
Yeah, I'm Mads Torgersen. I'm originally from this little country called Denmark. I've been where I was, a professor doing programming language stuff. And then I got hired by Microsoft 17 years ago to help work on C#. First, I worked with Anders Heilsberg, who's sort of the legendary creator and first lead designer of C#. And then when he and I had a little side project with others to do TypeScript, he stayed over there and I got to take over as lead designer of C#. So for the last, nearly a decade, that's been my job at Microsoft to take care of the evolution of the C# programming language.
Right. So are you, is it similar to like a Guido van Rossum role where you are, supreme dictator for life, or is it just like you're in charge and if people say things you can say yes or no?
Yeah, I try to resist people calling me. Sometimes they use the term benevolent dictator for life because that sounds better. I'm at least, he's an authoritarian, but at least he's friendly about it. But I think in some ways I am, in the sense that I'm at the end of the table. If there's a difficult decision and we need to make a call, I'm the one who makes the call. But at the same time, I don't own the resources to actually bring, features to life. That is, there's a Microsoft budgetary and management leadership structure in place. And if I decide to go off the rails, well, it just won't happen. So in that sense, I'm more like a figurehead in that sense. Like, of course, whoever puts in, it's open source. So, in principle, if there was a revolution and I decided to lead it, other people could take the language in a direction Microsoft didn't want. But that's not how it works. But yeah, I'm the person who's hired full time where my full time job is to evolve the language, and so in that sense, I'm in charge.
So I guess the book stops with Mads then. If like you said, if there's a difficult decision, 50-50 split, it's Mads who decides, no, we're going this way.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. But I try very hard to make that a rare occurrence. I find we're immediately going off into details here, but I find that, and this is something I learned very much from Anders, that a collaborative approach to language design is the best. It helps you, if you can create like a safe environment and have a bunch of people with different perspectives contribute. And if you can get that diverse group to sometimes even agree, but at least like to at least support the way the decision was made, where it's like, yeah, it didn't go my way, but I appreciate that was, you know, how we landed on it. Then these decisions get the outcome itself gets better, but it also becomes more durable. That you that decisions stick when you don't have big fights over them that will be, leave resentment and be fought over and over again.
Sure, that makes sense, right? If you have a group full of people and everyone gets a chance to cast their vote, then, you can't really be upset if the vote doesn't really go your way because you've had the chance, right? It's the whole democracy thing. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and we don't actually even vote that much. I mean, well, we often do what we call a read of the room, where we list the options and people will vote for the one that they like. But it's not like a binding vote. That's not how decisions are made. It's part of the discovery process of, okay, where are we still? So, why are you all not seeing it the same way I am? And we can find out and we can sort of take the next step. Sometimes we will just say, yeah, we have to decide something. We can't really spend all day on this and we'll just go with a majority. But it's not generally a vote-driven decision-making process.
Sure. And I think it's an important skill to be able to develop as someone in the technology space, right? To be able to have that collaborative discussion. Like you said, here is the way I'm seeing it. How can I help you to understand it from my perspective? Or indeed, how can I ask the questions to help me to understand it from your perspective?
Yeah. I mean, it was one of the things that really baffled me when I first joined the team. I was allowed to join the C# language design team from the beginning because I was kind of hired to be there. Even though Anders is, he's a total hero. Like he understands programming language so deeply. He has so much intuition and such a good gut feel for things, as well as this wealth of knowledge. And he could do a very good job on his own, but even he realized that he had only one perspective in his own head, and he needed a group of people and he needed to treat them well and as equals and allow for a full discussion and even his presence, people needed to feel safe and not like they, not under pressure to behave in a certain way. And he created a space like that. That was the C# language design meeting from the beginning, even before I was there. And that is, that was an extremely valuable lesson for me to learn. Probably the more important than any technical insights I've had over the years is that just how to approach design so that it gets good and so that it sticks and so that the people who participate in it are are happy participants, that they contribute their best and that they feel safe and engaged. That's the most important thing you can do if you want to design something new, I think.
Absolutely agree with you. No matter what your team is doing, right? You all need to be able to collaborate and have those discussions where someone can say, I'm not, like you said, I'm not fully confident in the direction we're going, or I have a reservation, or I have a different of opinion. Being able to be in a space where it is okay to say, hey, I've got something to say, and being able to have that knowledge to be able to say, look, what I'm about to say could rock the boat, but this is how I feel. And for everyone to go, okay, let's take that on board and let's see if we can either come up with a solution to that, or maybe we table this for now and, whatever that team decides to do. I think it's a very important decision it's a very important skill to have, regardless of where you work, right? If it's in the technology space, if it's in retail, if it's in wherever, right? Because we don't work alone. We work with, a big team of people, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, whenever you have, which often happens in workplaces, you have situations that group settings that are not safe for everyone. Sometimes it's funny because sometimes the people who are the leaders of that setting will feel that, oh, that was great. We had lots of fun. It was jovial. There was like a relaxed atmosphere. But what you really find is, it was only a certain group in there that was speaking and that was actually able to participate in, the sort of the culture of the meeting, if you will. And it's hard to notice when people are like fading to the sidelines. And I know I've failed on that many times where I've just realized too late, or at least later than I would have liked, that, oh, I'm actually not as inclusive as I thought, because it felt good to me. So I think it's important to keep an eye on everybody's sort of emotional well-being in these group settings, because otherwise you're missing out on their perspective and they're not having a good time with it.
Sure. I think because we've been going for a few minutes, I think it's really important for me to stress to anyone listening that obviously I'm talking to Mads, the person, not Mads, the person who I'm not talking to the voice of Microsoft, right? I'm talking to Mads, the person. And I think that's an important thing to say. I realized I hadn't said that yet. And I feel like that's an important thing to say.
Yeah. I still am. I've been there for 17 years, so I've probably been brainwashed to some degree, but I still consider myself a separate entity from Microsoft.
Of course, yeah. I was just to set that expectation for people who are listening, going, well, Jamie's about to ask Mads a bunch of questions about C#, and this is the set in stone answer from Microsoft. I'm like, well, you're not here as a representative of Microsoft, right? So that's just to let everyone know, right? Excellent. So, like I said earlier on, I've been using C# for 14, 15 years and absolutely love it. I started back in the .NET 2. I think .NET 2 had just come out. So this is like, not a huge amount of time ago, but like I said, 14, 15 years ago. And it was at university. That's how they taught us. They were like, okay, we're going to teach you Computer Science 101 with C#. And we didn't even get into Visual Studio at all the entire time we were there. That's got nothing to do with is Visual Studio good or bad. It was more a case of the lecturer that I had was like, right, I'm going to teach you how to use the C# compiler from the command line, and we'll use Notepad to write the stuff, because everything after that is like a value add, right?
Yeah.
Visual Studio is great, but let's see if you can't use the compiler, then maybe you can't use Visual Studio, right? So let's start there and build up. But yeah, I mean, do you, as someone who has worked very intimately with the design of C#, do you have any favorite language features or favorite things about the language? It may seem like an out of left field question, but I feel like if you're involved in something for so long, then maybe there's something you're like, it was a great idea that we did array list. I mean, I don't think it was a great idea. It was a great idea that we did array list.
You're making sure to mention something that wouldn't be on my list. Well, it's interesting because I often find that, I mean, not everything we put into C# during my time there has been equally successful. And sometimes, I mean, you kind of have to be in love with the features you're making right now. You make a decision to go down that road, and you have to commit yourself to it and fully inhabit the mindset of that feature in order to make it good. And then later, maybe you find out, well, okay, but that wasn't the right mindset, or, so as an example, maybe one of the first features that I was really instrumental in shaping was dynamic. And not that was my feature or anything, but I was deeply involved in how do we do this and how do we make it elegant? And in many ways we succeeded. It is fabulous from sort of a purity explanation point of view that that method lookup, overload resolution, when it happens at runtime, it actually happens the same way as it does at compile time with non-dynamic things. It's like, wow, we really did something cool there. And because it made interrupt with other languages great, and it kept C# even when it was, resolved later and so on. And I was really in love. I felt like we've really done and it moved the needle compared to the the industry and everything, but the world turned out to not need dynamic as much, and not need it to be that way as much. The overhead of doing such a good job at runtime became, a performance challenge that you now really have to be aware. When you use dynamic, you really have to be aware of the performance overhead of it. So that was a situation where we didn't anticipate. I think we didn't anticipate the renewed focus on performance that everybody takes for granted again now. There was sort of a period of time where C# and Java and these languages, they're just for writing on PCs, essentially, PCs and Macs, and they get bigger every year. So if it's a little slow this year, next year the machines will catch up. And then the world completely changed, then smartphones came out, then, the cloud became a big thing where, again, you had to pay for cycles and memory and so on. And so all of a sudden, cogs, all of a sudden, it wasn't such a good idea. So that's just a big preface to say that I might like a feature and then find out later that, but it's not good to have, but it shouldn't have been like that, A feature that I think has held up very well given the design constraints at the time is async. That's probably the one I'm proudest of, because that really was my doing. And even though it didn't turn out exactly the way we tried to do it to begin with, it ended up sort of hitting the right balance between what was doable and sort of we opted for something much more general, like sort of like a coroutine mechanism that could be used to retcon iterators that were already in the language, as well as async iterators, and then we were like, what else do people use coroutines for? And we're like, actually not a lot. And so we're like, okay, actually let's make it more like just a concrete language feature instead of abstracting out the coroutine-ness of it, if you will, the ability to pause an execution and resume it later. So and when it landed, it really transformed the way that you write asynchronous code, and that was at a fortuitous moment because, again, we were talking about smartphones and the cloud just coming out, and with that, not only do you get new resource constraints, but you also get latency, because everything becomes a distributed system now, in one way or another, and latency becomes this big issue that you have to deal with everywhere. Windows 8 was just coming out, and I know most people don't like to mention it. Don't mention the war. But but one big design tenet of Windows 8 and the APIs that they were developing for it was indeed that they were all async when it came to networking and even file system stuff. And so that was for C#'s own environment, it was fortuitous timing, and async became, a big success. It reduced the complexity of asynchronous code by, at least one order of magnitude. And at the same time, it sort of reverberated through the wider language community and it has been picked up by many other languages, even big ones, over time. So we kind of felt like we did the right thing for C# and for Windows, which we were still kind of tied to back then, and we influenced the language landscape in a big way. So that was we kind of got to set the agenda for how asynchronous programming should be done in modern programming languages. So that's probably my all-time favorite. That was where I really sort of felt like, okay, I can do this. I got this.
I like it, and I think there's of all of the features that I use on a daily basis, async await has to be the number one thing, right? Async await and tasks, all of those, just like you said, everything is a distributed system, right? You're poking at the file system, or you're poking at the cloud somewhere. You don't want everything to lock whilst it's waiting, and I love that's been added, because I remember I had, at the time that the parallel task library came out, I changed jobs, and they were like, we're going to look into this parallel task library stuff. And I was like, okay, what's that all about then? And just learning all that. And then by the time I'd had a chance to learn all of that stuff, they were like, well, there's this experimental stuff, async await, let's use that instead. I'm like, well, I just learned all this.
Well, they were strongly influenced by each other. So I think that, if I recall correctly, they ended up working together quite well, the parallel task library and async await.
Yep. It was a very interesting time indeed, because I'd be talking to my Java and JavaScript developer friends. Obviously they're two different technologies for any recruiters listening. But we know that they're different, but they didn't have async await, and I'd be talking to my JavaScript friends and saying, look, I'm not going to make fun, but what do you do if you have to do a long running task? Like, well, we're going to have to make some stuff up and do some futzing around with stuff. And I'm like, wow, so you don't have async await? That's weird. But yeah, well, seeing everything else evolve alongside it has been amazing.
Yeah, it was one of those. That was a really fortuitous turn for C#. I think we oftentimes nowadays we think about the turn to .NET Core as and that was really a big turning point also. But I think sometimes you're at these there are these turning points where you either do or die, right? You have to, if you don't make an important turn that is coming up sort of in the industry, in the world, then you kind of you run off the road and you're no longer like you stop being relevant, or you have to fight to get back into relevance. So that was one where I think we make the turn in time, and even ahead of many others. And that was good.
I agree. I agree. So one of the things that I've obviously, having used C# for so long, is that I'm going to be careful of my words here. Now that C# is no longer tied to .NET Framework, because .NET Framework's brilliant, but obviously the evolution of that slowed all the way down now. And that makes sense because it's directly tied to Windows Update. So if someone pushes out an update to .NET Framework, they have to make sure that everything that's ever been written for .NET Framework is going to run. So, one of my goals is to try and figure out just how many tests there are for .NET Framework, but that's not for this conversation. But with C# no longer being sort of tied to Framework, and it more sort of freely evolving alongside .NET Core and .NET as it is 5, 6, and the continuing numbers, I just like the speed that it has evolved. It blows my mind. Like how do you all get together and come up with these ideas so quickly?
Well, I think there are two. Well, you should never say ahead of time how many points you're about to make, because you're usually wrong.
Of course.
But I can think of a couple. Let's say that a couple of different aspects here. One is that we have an openness now, because along with the turn to .NET Core, we also open sourced C#, the implementation, like the Roslyn compiler for C# and Visual Basic, but also the evolution process itself. So C# language design happens in a public GitHub repo with lots of community participation. And those things, combined with all the other ways that we connect with the community, they mean that a lot of people bring stuff to us and make it easier for us to, both get a sense of what's important and not so important to pick up, and give us such a wealth of ideas, as well as, ideas and scenarios and challenges to work from, that we really never, it's never a problem for us to go like, oh, what should we do? Can anyone think of anything to do next? That's never a question that you hear. It's always like, oh, which of these lovely things can we not get to? And do we need to not spend time looking at, even though it's great, because we just have even greater things to do. So we get a lot of things flowing to us that make it easier. We still have to do the hard work of, making it fit, making it great in a sort of like integrative way. But on top of that, I honestly think that the perception that C# is evolving faster is, at least to some degree, an illusion. What happens is that C# is C# is being released much more frequently now, like new versions all the time. We kind of started that with the 7s, where we experimented with having minor versions of C#. And then we just went to now shipping a major version every year along with .NET. At least that's the current plan of record, for the foreseeable future. And so we started thinking differently about what it means to ship features. When you think back to the first C#, for those of us who have memory to draw on all the way that far back, they were very much themed releases. Like there was C#2 was 80% about generics, and C#3 was 80% about LINQ. C#4 was 80% about dynamics. C#5 was 80% about async, and then a few other things thrown in. And then that kind of petered out because and especially as we've upped the frequency of releases, we started to think about feature design differently, where we approach things much more incrementally. So for C#7, for instance, we realized, okay, pattern matching. It's time for pattern matching. C# would be a much better language if we have pattern matching. That has to do with that also has to do with the cloud, with the turn to the cloud, because once you have, so I'm taking a detour, but I'm coming back to your point.
Sure.
Once you have data as sort of like a separate thing, long-lived data in the cloud, then it gets harder to sort of apply an object-oriented paradigm to say that, to use virtual methods essentially to get behavior that's dependent on the shape of the object, which is the classic object-oriented thing that C# is very good at. Now you have a given hierarchy of types. It's already there. I mean, you could probably write your own and your own serializers and whatnot for what's out there, but it works better if somebody just defines the types, and you use those types. But you use them for your thing, and so you can't put virtual methods on those types. What you need to do instead is you need to take them in and say, is it this? Is it that? Is it one of those? And then do the shape-dependent behavior in sort of more of a switch style, which is exactly what functional languages do, actually, as a matter of fact. They have data and functionality separate, and they work with instead of like an open-ended class hierarchy, classic functional programming turns it on its head. It has a closed set of shapes, in the form of discriminated union or whatever, and then they have an open-ended number of functions, each of which switching on the shape and doing whatever is appropriate for each particular variant of the data. And that's the right way to go for when that's what you need when you need your functions to be separate, because nobody had thought of them when the data shapes were assigned or written, right? So pattern matching became important with the advent of the cloud and the importance of long-lived data. So, but on the other hand, designing a whole, like we could have made C#7 the pattern matching version, right? And then we could have sat down for years and mapped out all the ways that you might want to pattern match data ever. And if it had been in the old days, that's what we would have done, and we would have done it in secret, and we would have made a big splash about the full pattern matching capabilities of C# and all the 17 patterns that it had. Yeah, so instead we decided to ship the most important part of pattern matching, the stuff that was most needed right now, and we had the highest confidence in what that would look like. And then we would design pattern matching, try to think a couple of versions ahead to what we might like to do, so we were not designing ourselves into a corner. That often happens with a mature language, right? You make one decision and you find out 2 versions down the road that you blocked off something that you really would have liked to do. And so we tried to design ahead just to see, is there a path forward? But then we would only do the first part of it, ship it, have people start using it, and because we're committed to that bit now, but then we can see much better what's the right next step to take, and the next step, and the next step, depending on, not just based on our sage predictions in some dark room somewhere, but based on actual usage and feedback. So we find that iterative language design, where the iteration is actually shipping the feature over many versions in an open-ended way, works really well for us. But that means that it feels like there are 7 new features or 10 new features with every yearly release, but many of them are just sort of the next turn on the crank on a given feature. So in C# 11, we'll have list patterns. Okay, they're a new feature, but they're just like the next step with pattern matching. If we had taken all the patterns and the switch expressions and everything we did around pattern matching and smooshed it up into one release, people wouldn't think twice about calling it just one language feature. So that way,
sure.
In a sense, if you're following along in real time, it feels more confusing. You're getting a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of those. It's harder to keep up when there's not just a big theme and you can sit down and read all about it. And that's sort of the downside. But the upside is that we get to iterate with the whole world. We have an iterative design process together with everyone using C#, making all the little adjustments and prioritizations along the way. Oh, if it turns out pattern matching is falling by the wayside, it's not. Then, we can de-invest. We can choose not to do the next bit just yet, or if we can't come up with the next bit, we don't have to worry about being stuck with it. We just take another round of another year to settle it. So it's created a very good design environment for us, but it does create an illusion of increased velocity that when you watch things in real time, it's more confusing. And we don't really have solutions to that other than we're trying to get better at communicating more while we're evolving the language. Doing, whenever we, man, I just keep talking, don't I? Just stop me if you want to ask something else.
No, it's fine.
Another thing that we do that is even more iterative is that we have a very well-functioning preview language version that is in the C# compiler at any given time. If you say language and preview, you actually get whatever new features are in there at the time that aren't released yet and that aren't committed yet. And we, every couple of months, we ship a new compiler with more language features in it from the next release, and we get feedback on it, and we change the feature as it's in flight. Based on that feedback. So even at the sub-version level, we get iteration with the community as well. And it's so great. We fly with so much more confidence now. Instead of just waiting to see, will they like it? We have at least a subset of developers engaging early for that first kind of reality check. We rip the feature out because of that, this release, for instance. Then we ship something, then we get good feedback on what should be the next iteration of that feature, and so on. So it really is a much better, much more high confidence work environment, much more data rich work environment for us than it has ever been.
This episode of the .NET Core podcast is supported in part by Zoom Platform. Zoom Platform. No, not the video conferencing app. Zoom-platform.com. The premier DRM-free games portal. Unlike directionless larger stores, Zoom operates more like a boutique, offering all-time classics such as Duke Nukem, exclusive hidden gems like Hard War, and innovative indies like Wrecker Sunken Land. Zoom will even take requests and hunt games down for you. When Zoom signs titles, they make sure to get every release, version, language, you name it. That's how Zoom carves its niche. Zoom hand scans box art, manuals and other bonus content, and even records soundtracks. On top of all of this, Zoom always makes a point of securing the rights to obscure expansion packs and mods. When you buy the Zoom Platform edition of a game, you know you are getting the most complete and definitive edition. Zoom's staff and technology are best in class. In fact, when competitors can't get a game running on modern hardware, they go directly to Zoom. They're some of Zoom's best customers. Zoom provides unparalleled 24/7 customer service and closeness with its user base. Zoom's management interacts directly with customers via Discord. They take their small business approach very seriously. Zoom-platform.com, your friendly neighborhood DRM-free game store. And if you end up on the Discord server, look me up because I'm in there too. I like that because it feels like I can't speak for them, and I suppose you can't either, but I suppose it would mean that then perhaps the .NET team could then say, hey, what about if we adopt this new C# feature that's in the compiler that has been shipped? How does that affect the runtime? How does that affect the build tools? And they can like use that themselves.
Yes.
And it's almost like you can dog food it, right? And you don't have to, you can still rely on the external developers, but obviously you can then, within the teams at Microsoft, I suppose, you can say, hey, just try this new feature out. Tell me what you think. If you wanted to. I'm not saying you do, but yeah.
Oh, but we do. We do a lot. And we're very, that's another thing that changed, is that we've pulled together much more across all the .NET teams and much more in real time than we used to. We are in C# language design itself, we have quote unquote representation. That sounds like it's a committee. It really isn't. But we have perspectives from, the runtime, the BCL, the ASP.NET team, and so on. People who are like C# enthusiasts, but are also involved in the evolution of their technologies. And oftentimes we gang up and do something that is like, that really has its impact across these different layers instead of evolving each independently. Like minimal APIs is a recent example of that, where we worked with the ASP.NET team to prioritize general purpose language features that also happen to really contribute to a user experience that they were ready to put out. Many places in the BCL, we work so closely with them because not only the simplest version of that is we need some types to be in the BCL to support the language feature, but also we create things for them that help them write more efficient code or more usable APIs, So we really work closely together and they adopt the features in real time. We often see that the BCL has even changed their implementations of many methods, even though it's not user-facing, to use new language features. Even at the time when we ship, they've already adopted the feature across their code base. So, yeah, no, it's really it's really great. This incrementality and kind of cross entity collaboration, reaching out to the communities as well. That makes up for, what we miss when we don't have Anders' intuition to draw on as the sort of guiding light these days. So, that's how I get to sometimes look a little smart. It's because I rest on all these shoulders and we get all this awesome stuff from collaborating left and right.
I see. So I do have a question about related to the minimal APIs and this idea of C# becoming, I don't want to say simpler, but maybe easier to get started with for people who are new to development. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we'll have some time to come back to that. But like, do you ever get the warm fuzzies when you hear about, oh, this team has built this thing, or this person has built this thing using a language that you've had such an intimate connection to, and you've brought this language out to the people, right? You said earlier on, right? You're the person in charge right now,
yeah,
and have been for many years. So, do you get like when you hear about things like .NET MAUI or like when before Microsoft bought them Xamarin, these people have gone off in their own direction and built this cross-platform thing? Or maybe if you're talking to someone at a conference and they say, oh, cool, I built this wonderful thing, would you like to see? Do you ever get like the warm fuzzies, like, oh my goodness, I had a hand in making this, I guess?
All the time. I still can't believe that I get to have that kind of impact. And every time it turns out that the impact is positive, that's the warm fuzzies. Also a little bit of relief, right? You're always a bit worried that you're taking things in the wrong direction. All this course correction really helps. Like if we're about to do something that isn't quite right, we'll usually find out before it's too late now. But absolutely, it's the degree to which people still say that they really love C# and they love the new things that we do, that is really that's really nice to hear. Now, it's useful feedback, right? To hear that you're on the right track. It's even more useful feedback to hear when people are worried about something, and because that sort of, and there's always, a set of people who, for everything we do, there'll be some people who don't like it. And it's important not to wave that off and say, oh, they're always naysayers or whatever. That's some of the most important signal we can get, because they're not wrong. They have their own experience, and in their experience, this isn't the right thing to do. Now, sometimes people will have sometimes you can see, okay, this is clearly, a quick gut reaction. Like, they haven't actually, where you can say, hey, go try it and come back, But many times it's them sharing experience that's valuable for us to listen to, and so we try not to just wallow in the positive, and also be tuned into when people have when they say like this is the stupidest thing, and we're like, okay, if they're too abrasive, we probably will just block them. but if they're like, but if they, we can feel that they really have a frustration or something, it's really important to say, hey, I'd really love to hear what you're up against. They're like, what is the thing? Is it, maybe we can tweak it a little and it'll actually be fine, or maybe there's a fundamental direction thing here that really isn't working for you. Let's find out, And of course, if it's one person, we may not, overcompensate for that. But then you can sometimes see a trend where it's like, I'm worried about it too. And you can sort of see, if there's more of kind of like, not necessarily like, an overwhelming trend, but sort of like a sub trend of things, then it's important to keep an eye on, because we might be sort of teetering on the brink of something not so good.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay. So what about, with your work with the work of the team who work on, it's not just your work, right? It's everybody else who does C# stuff. But with the work that you and the team have put in alongside the ASP.NET team, you've made, like you said, you've made minimal APIs and this ability to sort of get started a lot faster. One of the things that I bring up to a lot of my non.NET development friends is that, like, up until last year, Hello World it was 15 lines of code. If 11 to 15. I think.
You could do it shorter, but it was, yeah.
Yeah, like if I'm teaching someone, like a person who's brand new to development, I'm saying, okay, do Hello World, right? We're going to ignore what a using statement is. Don't worry about a namespace, what a class is, what a static void main is. Just look at the console.write line and a bunch of strings. And now if I do, I don't know whether it's a great test of the language, but when I do Hello World with new people now, it's one line of code and there's a comment that comes with it to explain why it's so short.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what I really like.
Yeah, the comment is for the people for whom the people who are not new to the language, to say, no, it's all right. If this confuses you, go here. It's interesting because that the top level statements, it was, one of those features that got quite a lot of pushback. It got pushback initially from people who were like uncomfortable with changing what a program looks like. They had, some valid feedback. It's harder for me to grep for where the program even is, and things like that are real, like, the downsides. But we try to make it very, very nearly as expressive as the old quote unquote way of doing it. But it's one of those, and then we got another wave of feedback when we made it the default in templates in Visual Studio, which I think we did with the last release, where again people were like, I want my templates to do it the old way because I like it the old way. Or my company still hasn't moved away from the old way, and whatever. And so we created an option right there. You can sort of in Visual Studio you can click. There's a single checkbox where you can click to say do it the old way. But but there's really a trade-off there between familiarity and then being accessible for new learners. And when you have a 20-year-old language, 20 plus, I should say now, some things are dated. There are amounts of verbosity that were considered virtues back then that are now just a pain and that don't really compare favorably to newer languages. And so even in just when it comes to verbosity, we need to stay relevant. We can't just say, well, this is the C# way. And, we have to offer things that are both more familiar to people who are from other languages and also that have less overhead to read through and understand as a new learner, even a new learner of programming. So that is part of our, certainly not all our focus as language designers, but one of the kind of tenets is make C# more and more approachable if you're coming from elsewhere or starting new. What that means is that we add new ways of doing things that you could already do. And that then means that because we can never take things out for back compat reasons, that means that the language grows quote unquote unnecessarily from a sort of expressiveness perspective. So that's something we have to deal with. And I think we're not quite there yet with kind of having a good, what should you actually do about this fact that there are multiple ways of doing things? Like, how do you help people do the right thing? What is even the right thing if you sit down to write C# today? And that's something that we're thinking about a lot more. Again, there's a great collaboration with the documentation team, which is excellent. The C# documentation team is absolutely astoundingly excellent. And we're in conversations right now about how can we say more, be more helpful on that question without being prescriptive or judgmental because people, it's up to people how they want to use C#. But if you're genuinely confused, then maybe we can help you. So I think that we're trying to think about, we sort of have a very loosely defined term that we're batting about, which is quote unquote everyday C#. Like if I don't have constraints from the past that make me have to do things differently, and I don't have very special domains that make me have to open up the hidden corners of low-level C# and all that, then here's the subset, quote unquote, of the language that I should do things in. That's something that we're thinking of trying to make more of a statement on. And that would then be a moving target, right? When we introduce something like top-level statements the next time, then we would sort of throw out the old way from everyday C# and we would take in the new way instead and saying, well, if you're writing, a quote unquote modern C# application, then this is probably how you should approach. This is what we consider the best of C# now. We did this new feature because we think it's better than the old one. So of course we think you should use it. That's something we want to try to communicate a little better. We're not quite there yet, but that's something we're working actively on to counter the confusion around a growing language.
Sure. I think, though I may be remembering incorrectly, but I think I remember Kathleen Dollard saying something about perhaps we can come up with almost like an idea of a story, right? Instead of saying, this is the C# language that you should use right now, perhaps maybe something that's more descriptive or like I say, I may be misremembering, but I'm sure it was something that I listened to today on .NET Rocks that she said something along those lines. Again, I'm probably misremembering, but like you say, there's plenty of different ways to show people the new, and here's the thing, right? From my point of view, just because there are two different ways to do something doesn't mean that you have to know both and you have to use both, right?
Right.
My thing is, I'm all about setting a coding standard and then working towards that, because then you can say to the other people on your team, this is how we do it, right? And like you're saying, right, with this idea of modern C#, this is the modern C# way of doing things. If you want to deviate from that, totally. But there be dragons, right?
Yeah, but I also want to acknowledge, and by the way, yes, Kathleen is one of the people I'm working with on this, and she has great thoughts on this. But I want to acknowledge that there's a kind of a conflict or potential conflict between coding standards, as you say, and then evolving the notion of everyday C#. Because if you have coding standards, that's probably because you have a code base that you want to be long-lived, and it will be written a certain way. And if you're disciplined about it, it will be written in a consistent way for the time that it was written. But if you evolve your coding standards all the time, then your code base is going to be stratified into different styles anyway. And if you don't, then everyone's going to have to suffer from not using the new features. So there is a conundrum there that I don't know that we have a good answer to. Maybe you do. What do you think about that? Turning the interview on its head here.
No, I like it. So my question back to you would be, how do other languages do it, right? So like, I know that things like C++, it's a lot slower moving, but like when a new version of C++ comes out, obviously everybody agrees this is how we do it. And then it must be, it's been, decades since I did any C++, but it must be a turning point where everyone goes, yeah, okay, we'll do it this way from now on, right? And I feel like that's probably a bad analogy, because I feel like the C++ tools evolve with the language, and if you're not staying with the new version of the language, you have to go back to the previous version of the tool. I'm not sure, like the compiler and stuff, I'm not sure whether that's the case, because like I say, I haven't done any C++ in years, but maybe having a look at how the other languages do it. But yeah, now that you bring it up, I would be afraid of saying, look, this is how we do it. It's set in stone at this company, and we're only ever going to program like this. But then I'm also, part of me is very worried about letting the tools do it for me. So like, I agree that I've had the last argument about linting and where brackets and braces should go. And, in languages that support it, semicolons or no semicolons, right? I let the tools do it for me. But yeah. I feel like that it's okay to do that because maybe I'm not as much as experienced in those other languages. But I feel like with C#, I'm like, I like to think I know what I'm doing.
Yes.
So yeah. I'm a little bit more reluctant to let Visual Studio or whatever take over and say, no, that should be over here and this should be over there. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is one thing if it happens in real time when you're coding. I like, things like code styles in Visual Studio, for instance. Other tools have a similar thing where they, there's an agreed upon way that you lay out the code, and even feature preferences, like don't use var, use explicit types or whatever, depending on the coding style that you're targeting. And that's fine because the code is still there in front of your eyes, you still see the end result as you're writing it. I think it's more that if your code has been sitting there just building quietly for a couple of years and now you need to do maintenance on it, or you're writing code next to it that's in a different style. Now, should the old code evolve? Well, maybe we could build, like Roslyn is a great foundation for building high fidelity tools to refactor code in chunks, in big chunks, right? So maybe we could have a move forward tool, but now, even if it's high confidence that it does, has the same semantics and surface area and so on, you're still faced with the fact that now you have code that nobody ever wrote. Now if the sort of visceral memory or the spatial memory of what did the code look like, but whoever wrote it last, they come back and it's changed in this way that they can no longer sort of feel their way around, and they don't have that aha recognition that is needed to go in and fix something or whatever. There are all these aspects that are hard problems, and I don't even begin to have a solution to them.
I don't know, maybe like a pinning, like with dependencies, you can pin to a specific version, right? This happens a lot in node-based languages where you want to say, I'm pulling in this package, but pin it specifically to this one because maybe I have a secure version of it on my server where I've done a code review and stuff. perhaps the ability to pin a code base at a specific language, and then perhaps the team who were working on that project can then say, well, actually, we've set some time to one side to actually upgrade this to the latest or to a different version of the language. Then we'll make sure that all of the tests and things still run, because obviously it's now partially generated code. And then maybe the teams can then take some time and refamiliarize themselves with perhaps the way that the code looks now. I don't know. Just an idea, right? I don't know.
No, but that's great. I really like that, because I think another problem that you often get is that you have code that fades out of memory, that nobody's familiar with anymore, and then you have the problem, nobody wants to touch it. So maybe having an excuse to maybe having a discipline of going back to your whole code base once in a while, and sort of just, bringing it up in your editor, looking at the suggestions you get from the modern tools, saying, hey, why don't you, maybe from your updated code style that you have now, saying, why don't you actually rewrite this as pattern matching? It would be much more efficient and it would be much more elegant and so on. Try it, see what it looks like, but do it go through more manually, like one by one, and say, okay. And in the process, you refamiliarize yourself a little with the code, and you sort of, even though it's not quote unquote productive work for creating new functionality, maybe it's the kind of maintenance work that pays for itself. I don't know. I'm just, you and I just, making this up as we go along, but it feels like
we're spitballing an idea.
Yeah, it feels like we would at least solve multiple problems at once. We might be creating new ones, so we might be detracting too much from the forward velocity of the organization. I don't know.
Who can say? I am definitely not smart enough to be part of that conversation for sure. So
that's not really.
I wish you all the best of luck with that one.
I keep evolving my language. You guys figure out what you want to do with that.
Fair enough. So, okay, two really, hopefully, slightly quicker fire questions, because I know that I appreciate that you have a lot of stuff to do today. It's your early morning, it's my coming up to the evening, so I want to get out of your way and allow you to continue on with your workday. So, you mentioned earlier on that C# is done out in the open. It's done on the C# language GitHub. Is it just literally a case of, I have an idea, I'm going to go put in an issue or a pull request or something and just literally just type out my idea, and if it sounds great, then, you might run with it, and hey, we might have a Jamie type or something, right?
Yeah. It is literally that. You but understand that there's a lot of traffic and most things don't make it. So now GitHub, fortunately, GitHub now has this feature of discussions that's been there for a few years. Before that, it was all issues. So the concrete process is, if you have an idea, you go and open a discussion. Everyone can do that, and you see if you get any feedback on it. And then if we have this championing system, so anyone who's on the C# language design team can put a champion label on an issue. So essentially what we do is that if we see something in the, if a discussion leads to something good, then we can say, hey, would you like to propose this as a feature? And then you have to write up more, then there's more work. Then it's like, write out the syntax and semantics and describe, not spec level necessarily completely, but, describe the whole feature. And then you put that up as an issue, and the language designer who poked you to do it will then put a champion label on it. And then that puts it in line for the next level of the process, which is that every so often, and typically now it's mostly once a year, maybe with a few follow-ups during the year, we do a triage in the language design meeting where we go through all the champion features, not necessarily a deep discussion, but we'll try to spend about 15 minutes on each to decide which bucket it belongs in. Is this something that we want to move forward with? Is this something that we like, but we will put it on the back burner? Or is this something that was not now? Sometimes there's a small feature and we'll say, actually, we won't prioritize it, but we'll put it in, I think it's called the anytime bucket. And then someone in community might pick it up and implement it for us in the Rosling repo. essentially we're saying we would be fine if this came in, and we would provide the resources to code review it, for instance. So that's the way in, and then if it comes into the bucket that we're actively working on, then it's, some things actually end up languishing there. But in principle, the champion, whoever said I like this, they will make sure that it gets attention and that we move it forward. And that that can still lead to it. There are 100 deaths it can still suffer. But occasionally, then this becomes you got yourself a language feature. It's a long process, and with many steps to it, and that's partly just in order to manage the amount of incoming. There need to be many layers of filtering in the process and maturing of the idea without too much investment being done too early. So that's why the discussions really help, because we don't have to require that people fully describe an idea. We can have that more free flowing conversation step of it first, where the idea itself can mature or be shut down unanimously by the rest of the community. So you're like, oh, okay, sorry, I asked. I now see that I hadn't thought it through or whatever. But that's the way things come in.
I like it because if I, as an average developer, was to go, I want to put a new feature in Go, or I want to put a new feature in C++, there's a high barrier to entry there, right? Whereas I feel like you say, you jump into a GitHub discussion, you say, I've had this idea, here's an elevator pitch for my idea. What do you think? And then, like you say, somebody might come in and say, yeah, that's great, but what about this? But what about that? And it starts this conversation. Whereas, if I was, I'm not smart enough to do this, but if I was like, I've got this great idea for something in C++, where do I go? Who do I talk to? Nobody knows, right?
Yeah.
And then, like you say, maybe I have to write up a full proposal and write up the syntax and write out all of the stuff to go with it. And then maybe in the C++ version, right? I don't know. I'm guessing. Whereas this, it's like, it goes all the way back to what we talked about at the beginning. This collaborative idea, right? We're collaborating. We're teasing these details out to see if it actually makes sense and if it works. I really like that.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting is that it's not always the idea that's the most valuable thing. Oftentimes you'll be running into a specific problem multiple times and you'll be like, well, if I had a keyword, I could solve this problem. But what it really is, as a language feature, it's way too specific, maybe. But if it's a frequent problem, then maybe then it's good input still, right? I keep having this problem, and that's one thing you can bring to a discussion in C# Lang. Not like I have this idea, but I keep running into this all the time. It's really bugging me. But I think it's too specific for a language feature. Any thoughts, any ideas out there? Because sometimes there will be other problems that you can sort of see as, oh, actually, this is just another side of the same coin, or, it's similar enough. And sometimes you get to a critical mass of related problems or nuisances in code, and you can see, oh, but they could all kind of be done. They could be solved together much more generally with a feature like this. And then the feature idea kind of really just, the nuclear reaction gets sparked because you have a critical mass of problem. The problem being radioactive material, I guess, in this analogy.
I mean, it's a metaphor, right? Metaphors get the point across. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay, so one last one before we go on to how people can get in touch with you. Let's say we've jumped forward in time to 2030 and we're looking at a code base in C#. Are we expecting things to have evolved that? You said earlier on we're not really evolving that quickly, but are you expecting things to evolve in such big leaps that in 2030, using 2022's knowledge, can we still read that C# code? using modern or rather the day-to-day C# of 2030? Can we still read it?
That's a great question. I think the best, of course I can't know, but assuming
Of course.
we evolve at the same pace, I guess the best way to answer that question would be to go back to 2014 and people who, we hear from people who went away from C# at a certain point in their career. They come back and they're like, what just happened? If you go back to 2014, I wonder where were we at in 2014? I can't even remember the way the years map to the versions anymore. But there's definitely a lot has happened since 2014, right? Mm-hmm. And so it would probably be, if you walk up to something that's written using all the latest features, it would probably take some refamiliarizing. I hope that you won't feel, that will be a challenge just because there's a lot of new to learn. There's just syntax that you haven't seen before. I hope you would come to, this is the goal. I hope it's true. You come to appreciate after putting in that effort, that what we did to it since then actually turned out to be worthwhile, that it made C# better and it will make your life better once you've sort of acquired the new skills. And B, I hope you'll find that the spirit of C# is still in there, that it's still in spirit the same language, even though on the surface your code might have changed, that it still has that, what you liked about C# the last time you touched it. It's really hard to capture in words the spirit of a language. We try sometimes, but we don't always succeed. Part of it it's not just, what's in it. It's also, how we think about evolving it and so on. We try to keep it a language that still feels like a coherent whole, that doesn't have like too many sub-dialects that you can camp in and say, oh, I'm in the functional subset of C#, or I'm in the, like C++, they would have a template metaprogrammer subset or something. We try to keep it together and keep it in the same spirit that it was always in. And one way of doing that is to have people on the C# language design team for a very long time and to be able to articulate this. I feel like this doesn't feel like C#. And then that doesn't mean we'll necessarily dismiss it, but we'll have a discussion about it. And this is in the spirit of C#. Would this end up being good for people who like the vibe, if you will? So hard to quantify or specify those things, but it's something that we aspire to keep alive. And I would hope that that's the case in 2030. You're like, okay, now I get it. I get how this is C# 8 years later. They made some pretty good choices on that. And I still feel at home in this language now that I've gotten used to it being painted in a different color on the outside.
Sure. I like that because I was worried about that question because I was like, that's going to delve way too into specifics, but I like the way that you were able to deal with that because that's like you say, things evolve, right? And as long as we can still kind of use it, then there'll be, like you said, familiarity issues, but once you've gotten past those, it's not like you're going to suddenly be programming in French, right? Or in Spanish or something, right? It's still using that common base of stuff. I like it. So Mads, what about getting in touch with you or anyone else on the C# Lang group or whatever? Is it just head to Twitter, find you on Twitter if they've got a question, or are they best to ask their question on the C# language GitHub?
The C# Lang GitHub has the benefit that it's not just me. So there's a whole community. Oftentimes you don't actually need to get in touch with me. It's not very centralized. So, and C#, so C# Lang is definitely great. If you want to ask, if you want to involve me specifically, I'm not that I'm not like an avid Twitter user, but I go there several times a week, and I do quickly scan through my mentions. So if there's something there and it hasn't already been answered by someone else by the time I get around to that, then if I'm mentioned, then I will likely, there's a good chance that I will respond. So those are good ways, depending on, again, Twitter. It'll have to be a short question, just because of the constraints there. But both are great ways to kind of get into some C# language question.
Excellent. Okay. With that said, I'll make sure to put some links into the show notes so then nobody's having to go, well, what was the GitHub link again? He didn't say it. Don't worry about it. It's all in the show notes, folks. You don't have to worry about driving down the street, diving across your dashboard to grab your notepad and pen. Please don't do that. Please focus on what you're doing.
Good. Yes.
But what I will say, Mads, is thank you ever so much for taking the time to chat with me today and to chat with the listeners. I really enjoyed it, and there's a lot of stuff that I've picked up from this conversation I'm going to be taking back to my day-to-day C# work. So thank you ever so much.
Well, thank you. I actually, that was some great conversation we had there. There were some new ideas batted around and everything. I had a lot of fun. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Hey, no worries. Thank you. That was my interview with Mads Torgersen. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we've covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/review for ways to do that, or to reach out via our contact page. That's at .netcore.show/contact. And to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you all again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software.